all. I'm Junior Researcher Adam Southgate, working under Senior Researcher Dr. Jenkins. This will be the Order of Merlin's 10th training video for all of our hunters. To begin, we'll start with general announcements. The Mumbles incident has been resolved with only one additional casualty. Adam Davis, misunderstanding the term non-organic, attempted to kill a number of dormant flesh lice with a set of hardwood mallets. The flesh lice immediately fled into the wood of the mallets, moving through them and then into Adam's hand. The large number quickly hollowed out his arm and began moving throughout his body. Luckily, the others on site quickly recognized what was happening and set Adam ablaze. This is a good example of why we request in specialty contracts that any applicants have had experience with the target they're dealing with. Adam Davis's death was completely avoidable if he had bothered to take our guidelines seriously. Now, instead of serving his community as a brave, indispensable hunter, he will only be a cautionary tale to future generations. Lastly, and rather fortuitously, there is a specialty contract available that happens to relate to today's lesson subject. We require 2 hunters of journeyman rank or higher for a cult infiltration contract. Specifically, the cult you'll be embedded within is one of the many cults of the Lady of Bones and Roses. We are aware that infiltration work is not your standard hunter's affair, so we will be providing a 2-week intensive training course with the South Wales Police Service. Obviously, this is being done as a massive favour to us by the Freemasons, so we expect any successful applicants to be on their very best behaviour while under the tutelage of the Masons. Once your training has been complete, your mission can begin in earnest. So, as already referred to, today we'll be covering the entity known as the Lady of Bones and Roses, along with the many cults that spring up around her. To begin with, we must define subspheres, as the lady resides in such a subsphere. Unlike the more commonly mentioned spheres, such as our own, the Eldritch and Fae, subspheres are tiny pocket realities. To explain, our sphere contains our whole universe. The Eldritch sphere contains its own whole universe. A subsphere contains a universe of a sort, but at maximum it will only be the size of a galaxy. In fact, most appear to only be the size of a single world, like the one today's subject resides within. These subspheres massively outnumber the larger main spheres. However, their general impact upon our own is far smaller, as they tend not to breach unless they contain a very powerful entity. The issue for us when this arises is that because, like with any sphere of any size, they differ wildly in physical laws, when they do breach, we have very little to no knowledge of how these spheres operate. So, even though a new subsphere breach is rather rare and they don't offer nearly as wide a variety of entities as larger spheres, when they do breach for the first time, we are left in a scramble to understand a new devastatingly powerful entity with its own completely new set of physical laws. The lady herself is a very difficult figure to define, as we only truly know the effect she has and not her intentions, if she even has any. Truth be told, we have no idea what the entity known as the lady even looks like. What we do know is that starting in 1983, incredibly thin cracks within reality began opening and then closing one at a time all over the world. These impossibly thin tears between our sphere and the lady's subsphere would only be open for short periods of time to begin with, but over time they lasted longer and longer. While opened, they have a few disquieting but interesting effects. To begin with, the transmogrification of a small 10 cm wide ring beneath the tear. Any organic material, living or dead, within the ring would be turned to either bleach white bone or a thin membranous skin that would quickly fill with blood, giving it a rose petal-like appearance. Anything that enters the ring after the tear has been made will also suffer these effects. The other effect is the lady's song. Described as a motion made audible, it has a very strong effect on any that hear it firsthand, and the effects are still somewhat present when heard secondhand, like in a recording. When heard firsthand, it creates in the listener a strong obsession with the lady. Often equated with a parasocial relationship, the victim will wholeheartedly become convinced that the lady is trapped within her subsphere and will be driven to attempt to join her. Along with this, the victim will also fully believe that the lady loves specifically them, and they themselves will fall madly in love with their own image of her. For secondary exposure, the victim will gain a strong interest in the lady, but not feel a compulsion to join her. Instead, they will look upon the lady as one would a natural phenomena. These secondary exposed people will usually dedicate themselves to the study of the lady, often leading them to being picked up by organizations such as the Order to work as researchers. The biggest issue is that those who have suffered primary exposure will often band together, forming loose cults dedicated to reaching the lady's domain. What follows is a recording of an interrogation I conducted on one such cult member. Specifically, this individual belonged to, as they called themselves, the Knights of the Rose. Recording starting 2:37 p.m. So, Craig, they said you're willing to speak to me now?
Well, they stopped feeding me until I agreed, so here I am.
I apologize for this regrettable state of affairs.
It's fine. Besides, I only agreed to listen to your questions. I haven't decided to answer them yet.
Very well, let's begin. How were you first exposed to the entity known as the lady's influence?
Jesus Christ. I went hungry for 2 weeks to avoid a question like that.
Mr. Jones, I'd rather not mislead you. They will get more difficult.
Well, thank you for being honest, but that one isn't any big secret. I was hiking along the coast, coastal walking. I got to this sort of cove, and on the other side I saw this shimmering, glowing silver thing. As I got closer to it, I didn't even notice. I'd started running, sprinting toward it. I'd never moved so fast in all my life. That's when I heard it for the first time, and everything changed for me.
And why did everything change?
Because I knew someone loved me.
Craig, you were in a long-term relationship before this event. You knew love.
No, I trusted I was loved. There's a big difference. Damn it. It's so difficult to explain. It's like how people used to trust the sun would rise because they didn't understand how it worked. I know I have a soulmate. Who else can say that,
Well, for one, every other member of your cult.
They're a bunch of idiots, but they're a good means to an end.
But they all believe what you do, that they're the lady's one and only true love.
They're delusional, but they do what I want, and that's all that matters.
Look, Craig, you might not want to hear this, but I think it's important. Every single member of every cult of the lady has said some variation of what you've been saying. That they are the lady's soulmate. That they're using the cult as a means to an end.
I told you, they're mad, but they all work towards the goal of opening the door so I can see the lady, so what does it matter?
I think that'll do for now. I'll be back in an hour or so. I'll have the guards bring you some food in the meantime. Okay. End of interview, 2:41 p.m. with initiate
No.
Craig Jones of the Knights of the Rose. The myriad of cults dedicated to the lady may seem relatively harmless at first, however, on multiple occasions they have managed to widen the gap opened by the lady. Although it seems the lady immediately closes these rifts the second they're expanded, the damage is already done, with the worst case being when a cult in Canada managed to open a rift to a 1 centimeter width, causing a 10-mile radius to turn to solid bone. It's interesting that those who have heard the song through secondary exposure describe it as more sorrowful and resigned, even self-hating. It has been theorized that the lady is the only consciousness in an unconscious world, with her only connection being to passively view ours. Her effect upon our world is completely accidental and outside of her control. This has been somewhat corroborated by the fact that the first time a cult widened the rift between our world and hers, she did not open a new one for a full 8 years. But please keep in mind that this is only a hypothesis by a secondary affected person who may be under some cognitive effect we have yet to identify, though it is interesting to think about. Regardless, we are tirelessly researching a way to permanently close our sphere off from the lady's subsphere, as although this may seem cruel, it has been worked out that if one of these cults fully succeeded, the radius of effect that would be created would be nearly large enough to fully petrify the world in bone. We are often, in our line of work, confronted with situations where there just aren't any good answers. The only constructive advice I can give for you if you're ever put in such a situation is that it's always best to side with mankind. But that will do it for today. I hope you learned something, and with Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.